Okay, Reverend Wurmbrand languished for 14 years in a communist prisons. Though beaten and starved, he never broke. Having passed through hell on earth, his courageous Romanian pastor emerged with a burning love for God and his fellow man. In this remarkable book, conceived while he was in solitary confinement, Wurmbrand demolishes the arguments for atheism as presented by the Soviet Academy of Science in its Atheist's Handbook. And that was written, I think what we learned from this book so far is that it was out back in 1961. And so Reverend Wurmbrand, who is the founder of Voice of the Martyrs, wrote this book. Now, this chapter that we're going to read is called God Is. And we'll see how it goes. So here we go. I have seen Christians dying in jail whose last words were, God is. Were these wrong? Surely not. I would also like to die with the last assertion on my lips. We live lives on different levels. A scientist knows that all material objects are whirlwinds of elementary particles, as distant from each other as the earth is from the sun. But he has no hesitation in sitting down on a chair, knowing that it is a very solid object. In one sense, every wall is a huge void within which electrons whirl in vast orbits. But considered on another level, a wall is anything but a void. You have to be careful about this inoffensive wall. You may bump your head very badly if you walk toward it with the atomic theory in your mind. The same is true of religion. There exists a high philosophic level where, as we explained, you cannot apply to God the words to exist or to be, because these are too simple. He is more than existing. We Christians have room in our minds to consider the atheistic denial of God. But atheists know reality only as it appears on one level, and therefore they know it falsely, thereby placing themselves in deadly danger. There is another plane on which God simply exists and is. A partial truth is a dangerous thing. It is not without reason that we value, quote, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, unquote. Every cultured man knows that we live simultaneously in the Newtonian and in the Einsteinian universe, each with its own laws. Those who know only the Newtonian universe would not be able to fly to the moon or have atomic energy. We live simultaneously in a world in which we may not meet God, and in a second world, which atheists do not know, in which God simply exists, is, and allows us to hold communion with Him. It is a world of the spirit of practical religion. Chairs and walls and bread exist and are used as such in spite of molecular and atomic theories. Likewise, God simply exists. On occasion, His presence breaks through self-conscious barriers, especially in moments of crisis. There are instances known from history, and I have personally known many such cases of atheists, yes, of communist leaders who died in communist prisons, victims of party purges, and who in their last moment cried, O God, or Jesus. It would be profitable to ask where this belief in God comes from in the minds of millions of men throughout history. The atheists who deny God deny a notion that exists in their own mind. The English philosopher Locke has predicated the idea that there is nothing in our intellect except what has passed through our senses. A wild man in the jungle of New Guinea would not have in his mind the notion of television because the respective object does not exist in his world. If mankind had never had any experience of God, how did such a notion appear in his mind? Engels, in his day, was ready with an answer to this question, saying that our concept of God is a fantastic reflection in our mind of social realities. Christians then tried hard to prove that Engels was wrong, that God is not a fantastic reflection, but that the notion about Him is an exact mirroring of divine reality. The time has come for another line of approach. I admit that belief in God is a fantastic reflection, and I add that only the fantastic is real. All the quote realism that denied that men would ever be able to fly to the moon or pilot a submarine under the ice of the North Pole or annihilate distances by flying planes around the earth in a short time or split the atom, all such quote realism has been proved wrong. Likewise, the quote realism of those who live in God's world and honestly assert that he does not exist is just as wrong. On the other hand, the fancies of Leonardo da Vinci and Julius Verne and others like them who have become reality. And these dreamers of dreams who walk with God you cannot see or touch unless you develop the faculty of faith, perceive the reality which pervades all creation. Only the fantastic is real in modern scientists. Niels Bohr asks, quote, "Is anybody mad enough to have the truth?" Unquote. What is science? It is a discipline which makes the fantastic come true. It is discovered that within the nucleus of a cell in the DNA is contained a code in which all former generations have transmitted to the new being their physical features. Now, this knowledge had to pass outside the nucleus to where the proteins are built. So there is in the nucleus a kind of Xerox machine which makes a photocopy of the DNA, and there is somebody who handles the Xerox machine. A fantastic story. No novelist could have invented a better one. This fantasy is the truth about our organism. Might religion also be a fantastic reflection? Then it is the right reflection of a fantastic reality of its fantastic creator. Man's mind has a dualistic nature. It comprehends facts and it fancies. If it had not fancied, humanity would not have developed. Civilization is the fulfillment of what were formerly dreams. I would refuse a religion that consisted only of facts. It would not satisfy my dualistic nature. It must fulfill my desire after fancy, after myth. Marx and Engels described facts, the terrible exploitation that existed under early capitalism. But they did not stop at this. Because they were men, after the analysis of facts, fancy began to work. The dream of a new society without exploitation or wars or with social justice. The fantasies of science have been fulfilled. A holy life, which is sheer fantasy for one who starts a life of faith, is achieved by many. But the Marxian society is still a utopia. So Engels had no right to cast reproach on Christianity as belonging to fantasy, though we take this as a compliment. You might reply that it is possible to imagine things that are beyond the realm of possibility. Thus you can fancy an island, a square mile all made of diamonds in the midst of the ocean. Yet such an island does not exist. But everything you have imagined is real. In nature there are islands, there is an ocean, and there are diamonds, and there exists the dimension of 1 mile square. Now you have pierced together realities improperly, but it is only realities you could imagine. So in our mind, the notion of God which we have can be associated with wrong ideas. I can believe in an evil God, a God in human form, a tribal or national God, and so on. But all the time I deal with realities, whether rightly or wrongly. God himself exists and is what he is, not what we consider him to be. Engels did not have to tell us that our faith is absurd. If God would fit or could fit within the frame of my reason, he would not be a God but a low being like myself. A philosopher whose philosophy could be understood by his 5-year-old son would not be a philosopher. God, to be God, must transcend our reason by his deeds and by his being. The atmosphere we breathe is a combination of nitrogen and oxygen perfectly suited for our lungs. The distance of the earth from the sun and the moon is just what is necessary for the maintenance of life, health, and happiness. The perpetual cycles of rain and snow make the earth fertile. The tides of the sea keep the shores clean and fresh. Vitamins necessary for the body existence are provided in abundance. Laws and forces of nature stand ready to be harnessed for man's use. God has filled the earth with beauty and charm. There are majestic mountains and fertile valleys, tall trees, and carpets of grass, the moonlight, the stillness of the desert, the thrill of songbirds, all of which witness to the fact that God made the earth for our pleasure. If a young man loved a girl and presented her with a beautiful house surrounded by a splendid garden and told her, "This I have provided for you," the girl would have no doubt of the boy's love for her. This is just what has happened between God and us. He has made food to grow for us, and beneath the soil there are minerals and oils, good for tools and fuel, and there all the evidence of God's provision for our needs and therefore the actual existence of God. Consider the bees, which organize a city with 10,000 cells of honey, 12,000 cells for larvae, filled with honey for a place for the mother queen. When the bees observe that the heat is increasing and the wax may melt and the honey be lost, they organize the swarm into squads, put sentinels at the entrance, glued the feet down, and then with flying wings create a system of ventilation to cool the honey, something like an electric fan. Bees collect honey from an area of 20 square miles. Now, how can the tiny brain of a bee perform such wonders if behind it is not a higher mind, the mind of God? A group of scientists in Chicago did an experiment. A female moth of a rare species was placed in a room. 4 miles away, a male moth of the same species was released. In spite of the smoke of the city, in spite of the distance, in spite of the fact that the female was in a closed room, within a few hours the male moth was found beating its wings against the window of a room in which the female was confined. Explain such a thing without an intelligent being, a God who has created these things. Fish lay their eggs in the fjords of Norway, and from these eggs come a new generation of fish somehow find their way across the ocean to the Caribbean Sea. When the time comes for them to spawn in their turn, they return to exactly the same fjords they had previously left. A man has to spend 20 years learning to become captain of a ship and to travel across the Atlantic Ocean. Who taught these fish to travel? When we were in prison, the swallows made their nest in our cells, and every autumn they left our country. Yet these same swallows came back from the far as Mozambique to our prison in Romania, exactly to cell number 12, which they had left half a year before. For those who have their eyes open, the wisdom and power of God are revealed in a million ways. Does God exist? The question should not even be asked. In every true rendering of the subject predicate form, the predicate is contained in the subject. God is the ideal being, the sum of all the highest qualities, such as love, goodness, righteousness, omnipotence, and so on. If he has all the perfections, which he must, or he would not be God, he must have existence too. A non-existent God would not have the sum of perfections. To ask, is there a God, is tantamount to asking, is the existent existing? God is, with this conviction I live, and with this assertion I hope to die. I use the expression that God is only because I am dealing with atheists. Otherwise it is senseless. A tautology, like all bachelors are male. When you have said bachelor, you have already said male, and then you have said God, his existence is implicit. And when you have said God, his existence is implicit. Prayer simply exists. How did mankind come by it? Where did this phenomena originate? Nowhere. Men have always philosophized about God and have always sought communion with him. Both philosophy and practical religion have been sometimes primitive, sometimes terribly false, but they were there. An Indian tribe in North America prayed O our Mother Earth, O our Father Heaven, we are your children. The sacrifices you ask for we offer, with bent backs. Weave us a garment of radiant sunlight, the white dawn, the warp, the red evening, the woof. Let the murmuring rain be the fringe, and the rainbow the hem. Weave us a garment of radiant sunlight. We want to walk where the birds sing. We want to walk through the green grass. O our Mother Earth, O our Father Heaven. Augustine describes his experience of praying as a young child. I was sent to school to learn how to read and write, things the usefulness of which I had no idea. All the same, every time I was slow to learn, I was beaten. God, my God, what misery I suffered there, and how deceived I was. We did, however, come into contact, Lord, with the people who prayed to you. From them we learned, while we were, to the best of our ability, forming an impression of you, that you were someone great and powerful, able to hear us and to come to our help, even without revealing yourself to our senses. And it is true that even as a small boy, I began to pray to you, my refuge and my help, and calling on you, I lost all control of my tongue. And although I was little person, I asked you with no little fever that I might not be beaten any more at school. Soviet soldiers brought up in atheistic schools prayed on the battlefront. Not knowing anything better, many of them prayed, God and Mother Spirit help. Old-time members of the Communist Party who fell victim of the purges in Stalin's time shared prison cells with us and told us in the difficult moments they prayed. This prayer is a far cry from such lofty prayers as that of Saint Gertrude, Jesus, I am you, you are I am not you, you are not I, we both are together an eternity, and an entirely new being. But men pray, I have known an atheistic lecturer, but men pray, I have known an atheistic lecturer who prayed to God for the success of his godless speeches, which were his means of earning a livelihood. Dimly or consciously, men seek communion with God, who exists, who is, who can be met, and if they persist, they meet him. Okay, so that's the chapter called God Is.